Annie and I worked together for what, four to
Three and a
five
half
years?
years. 3.5 years.
Three
Yeah.
and a half years. And we tried to solve diversity challenges in Amazon Game Studios, which included my group, Prime Gaming, as well as the actual game studios, game technology, a bunch of pieces. And yeah, I see someone saying they saved questions for this one. That would be fantastic. All of you know the
Awesome.
drill to use our question extension. Please put your questions in there, and we will absolutely take them up towards the end of the show. Danny and I want to cover a few things up front, and then we'll jump into it. And her background, Danny is actually has a technical background like I have. She's a technical program manager. She took on this task as a special assignment a few years ago to try to help Amazon Game Studios improve in this area, and she's actually made tremendous strides. I don't know if you can share or want to share any of the good things you've accomplished.
I can share some of the good things. I can say that we have significantly, and by significantly, hundreds and hundreds of basis points improved the number of women in the organization over the last 3 years since I started this. We have doubled the number of Black and Latinx in our organization, and generally driven a culture of inclusion where we it's now just the way we do business. I was having conversations this morning with folks on one of our games about how do we make sure that we're representing characters who are not cis white middle-aged people appropriately in games, because we're not them. And it's how do you do outreach inside the company? How do you do focus groups outside the company? How do you make sure you're getting the right input to make sure our games represent our customers and our players? So that's been some of the fun. A lot along the way, there's been a lot of what I want to call breadcrumbs, where we have been able to get people to recognize the unintended consequences of some of their actions and behaviors, and how that has caused harm at companies they've been at before, and how we're changing behaviors in the company.
Yeah, and I remember that.
Yeah.
I've told on channel before. I'll reprise it super quickly. Anybody can go look up or Google the Amazon App Store and find something called the coin, Amazon coins from the Amazon App Store. And so
Mm-hmm.
super quickly, the backstory on that is the Amazon coin shows a female archer on it. And it was meant to be like a Amazonian, an Athenian archer. But it's a 3D design, and we had it made by one of our game artists back in the old days, long before Danny, a full decade
Yeah.
ago. And the first couple designs, game designer, game artist, made classic game art
Oh God.
where the archer was very well endowed and might have been unable to shoot a bow because of things in the way of drawing back a bowstring.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up fixing it. Like that was one of the first cases. But I remember it being discussed as like, is this a problem? How we represent this woman. And he was innocently, he was drawing the same art he'd always been paid to draw.
Yeah.
Um, so
And there had been no constraints before on what and how and where and what it looked like, and now we're having conversations about, does this costume allow somebody to have agency? Is this if you had freedom of choice, would this actually be a costume you would wear, as opposed to male gaze or female gaze? Is that what I want to see on a buff guy, or is that what I want to see on a buff woman, because I'm entertained by it, not what they would do, what I would do if I were in that situation, kind of thing.
yeah, it's really funny. I was going through some old stuff here, and Danny, you can see by the books over her shoulder, she plays D&D like I do. and I was going through some very old modules, and I saw a piece of cover art, and I was laughing because it was the classic two dudes in armor, like in plate mail, and a woman in a chainmail bikini. And it was totally like
Magic armor. I am fully protected on my arms in a bikini. Yes.
yeah, it was it was interesting art, but it was totally like, I mean, it was like a
Boris Viejo.
yeah, a very very limited chainmail bikini even. All right, so let's jump into this. And the thing I said I wanted to ask Danny first, we kind of talked about what we wanted to talk about, but let's get real about this at work. And the place I want to start is where I kind of gave the opening, which is, if I'm not a racist, and let's take a really let's go for the limited definition of that. Like, I haven't marched in the street wearing a hood or carrying a Nazi flag recently. And by the way, that's ever. I'm role playing a little here. I have never done that, but I haven't done that recently. I haven't broken out my Confederate flag recently. And I'm not a racist. I'm not an open misogynist. Why is diversity my problem then? I'm not holding anybody back. Why? Like, people make me feel bad. And I'm trying to portray everybody in the audience here. Often it's slanted as like, well, there's all this oppression and whites have white privilege, and somehow vaguely you're a bad guy. And I'm like, I'm not a bad guy. I haven't done any of these bad things. So why am I being treated like I'm a racist when I'm not? That's the overall feeling. Why am I being lumped in with the Nazis when I'm not one?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. One of the first things is sharing the playground doesn't mean oppression. So the fact that we want to have equal opportunity on the playground to play on the toys, to crawl on the monkey bars, whatever, means that you have to take your turn, doesn't mean that you're being oppressed. But because you're so used to having the entire playground to yourself, you're so used to having other people beg you for permission to be on the playground, that not being asked permission or being told you have to share can feel like oppression, can feel like I don't get what I used to get. When in fact, what we're doing is just trying to make it fair for everybody. Another way to look at it also is unconscious behaviors. So I'll talk a lot about unconscious biases, and I'll talk a lot about the programmatic coding that happens with little kids before they're aged 5, where you get your mental models, you get your value set that you have throughout your life before you're 5 years old. You consume it being in and around your family. And if you were like me, that grew up in a racist household with a pretty bigoted dad, there are unconscious behaviors and attitudes and mental models that I have that influence everything I do. And that's because if you go into the neuroscience, human brains process something like 11 million bits of data per second. We only keep 40 bits, 40, active and conscious at any time. So you've got all this underlying processing happening around where, if like me, getting raised in a household where Blacks were stupid, Latinos were evil, yada, yada, yada. That is part of that subconscious grounding that I have to fight every time I'm around somebody. So, when I was teaching, when I've been doing teaching at work, I will often start out by saying, I've had to build mechanisms to keep me from having my dad come out of my mouth. Because I can just, when you're in it, you can just automatically say something. It's like, oh, I didn't mean that. But yeah, that's how you got programmed by your family, by your parents. And so what we're hoping to do is make people aware of that. So then you can make a conscious choice. Am I going to say that or not?
Yeah. And so in a way, that's saying that all of us have some of these biases built in, unconscious
Yeah.
bias, what it's called. We all have some of the bias built in. And I know that's true. I've done enough digging around to know some of that's in there, where we're preloaded with cultural suppositions and assumptions. Um, and I realize that's accurate, but
Hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about the feelings for a second. Most most people, whether it's they're white or they're white male or they're male, and it's a discussion of gender diversity, they don't feel like they're bad people and racists or misogynists, but they feel like they are getting the message that they're
Mm.
somehow guilty by not doing enough. In other words, if we look at Black Lives Matter over the summer here in the US, we can agree that Black Lives Matter, but why? Like, if as long as I agree and I'm like, you're right, Black Lives Matter, why is there pressure on me? Like, I already agreed. I'm with you. Black Lives Matter. What happened to George Floyd was wrong.
Yep.
Why is that not good enough? I agree with you. And why am I
So
a
pass.
bad person?
Well, you're not a bad person, but passively agreeing is actually not being a part of the solution or driving change, right? So think of it this way. I'm going to tell a story about actually something that happened in your team about a year and a half ago. We had a team that had been together for one of the teams had been together for years and years. The guys on the team all knew each other from previous companies. They were all folks who were highly athletic, had come from very active backgrounds, and their way of bonding with each other is kind of the one-upmanship stuff that you see on like in pickup basketball, right? Um, the negative comments that are actually a compliment, the teasing each other, saying, "Why haven't you done X?" All of the kind of you missed the shot kind of joking around and teasing that is very common in certain situations. New person joins the team, a younger woman who was very accomplished and joined the team. She's not somebody who's athletic. She's not somebody who participated in a lot of sports growing up. And this behavior actually made her feel excluded. She didn't know how to participate in the discussion. She felt like she was being picked on a lot because she didn't understand, didn't have a Rosetta Stone to understand the terminology or the cadence of conversation that the guys were using. And it made her feel very alone, very isolated. She started getting, she was, her morale was impacted. And she actually seriously thought about leaving the team. Reached out to me, started doing some coaching with her, started doing some coaching with the guys just to make them aware of what does it feel like to be in a situation where you're uncomfortable. So in this case, we took one or two of the folks and had them sit around in a group of women who have a very different communication style. And they're like, oh, yeah, this does feel awkward, my being the only one in the room. I don't understand what's going on. And that led to some awareness building, and the team changed how they talked with each other in order to have that happen. It's 9 times out of 10 when I'm talking with people, what's happening are accidental moments of exclusion. Another example, we had one team that was working late because they were close to a deadline. And one person sent out an email to everybody they knew on the team that was still there saying, hey, does anybody want to chip in for pizza? The director of the organization happened to still be there, said, yep, sure, I'll chip in. Everybody chipped in, went and got pizza or had it, ordered and delivered to the building. What nobody noticed was the person who sent out the email only sent it to the guys who were still there.
Mm.
Either he didn't realize that there were still women in the building who were working on this, or didn't notice it and didn't think about it. So he only sent it to the 10 or 11 guys that he knew. What got around the next day was all these guys had a private dinner with the director.
Wow.
Yeah. So once that was brought to light, it's like policies were changed. Policy meaning team behavior was changed. Now the team has a habit of, well, pre-COVID, obviously. If you're going to be working late and wanted to do something like that, you had to send a mail to the group email address to make sure everybody was made aware. Um, Things like that are little things, but if you're a working mom or a working parent and you had to go home and you saw that everybody else on your team had private time with the director to shoot the breeze, to build a relationship, to, whatever, that could make you feel really excluded, right? I have friends in the company and various companies I've been at who, for example, are recovering alcoholics. And if you're in an industry like the games industry, where everything is about drinking alcohol, beer Friday, what happens at GDC, it's very hard to feel included or be able to be in those environments or do those things if you can't participate fully. And that's what we're looking to do is change that.
So, Danny, you raise a great question because we can take it away. This is the heart of what I want to get at, because I think a lot of people, we're going to come back to this and talk about how to be the hero, and I want to talk about that very much. But for a minute, you've raised a couple things that can be actually taken away from either race or gender. Some people have the freedom in their life, whether they're men or women, whether they're minorities or not, majority culture, to work late.
Yeah.
And some people choose or are able to drink, and some people choose or for medical reasons are not able to drink. I get that if I have kids and I have to go home and other people stay late and it happens one of those is the manager and he brings in dinner, that I have different access. I get that. But how do we get in a world, I know you well enough to know you don't want a world where no one can drink, no one can stay late for dinner, no one can do these things. So how, I absolutely get that it's exclusive to go out for drinks when someone on the team may not drink. At the same time, how do we make it so that people can go out? Like, how do you win in that situation? Because that's what we're gamers. People want to win.
Yeah, you rotate. So maybe you do a team lunch, or maybe you do a team event over lunch one day. Maybe you do it in the middle of the afternoon another time. Maybe you do it on Tuesdays versus Fridays. Survey your team and say what's the best time for you, and you find you don't just go with the 80-20 rule. You say, you know what, we're gonna min max on this cohort this time, we're gonna min max on that cohort that time, and you rotate through team activities that may have nothing to do with athletics. You may have team activities that do, curling, skiing, whatever it happens to be. And if you have some events where everything is sodas, some events where you and I both used to work with someone who, for religious beliefs, had some very restricted dietary habits, right? We did milk and cookies once just to have some fun with it, but also, as David, right? It was, just to have some fun with it. But it was how can we make him feel included and not have him always be sitting on the outside because the rest of us are drinking whiskey.
Right.
He was totally okay with us doing that, but it's alternating, and it's surveying your team to find out what do they enjoy doing, and then building things around that.
Well, so the point I take from it, though, is you're not recommending that to be inclusive, we do not have to attempt to somehow be perfectly inclusive of all people at all instance. But rather, I'm going to hand wave here, equally inclusive of different beliefs in rotation or in some distribution. In other words, if we want to have a let's get shit-faced night and some people participate and they like that, and we want to have a not, as long as that is not the norm or well, basically, so as long as everyone has equal opportunity, or to the point, as long as there's roughly equal distribution of exclusion, honestly.
Yes.
So, and yeah, somebody in chat says food should bring people together, not exclude. I'm so with you. Except some people really enjoy alcohol with a meal. Some cannot have it. Some people really enjoy eating meat. Some people are vegetarian. Some are vegan. Some follow kosher. Some follow halal. It becomes some are gluten free. It becomes incredibly difficult to actually put together a meal that meets everyone's criteria. And so I agree with you violently, and you can try, but what we don't want is least common denominator of every possible.
Totally. Yeah. You want it to work its way around the circle or the pie, however, if you think of if subdividing a pie, ratios of people. And if this time we focus on, vegetarian food, but the other thing is, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on, is it really hard to find food that everybody can eat? And the reality is you can. What you have to do is provide variety.
Yep.
So just make sure that this dish is identified as being dairy-free vegan. This dish is gluten-free carnivore. And if you work with your caterer or you ask questions of the restaurant, most of the medium scale restaurants on up are very aware of dietary restrictions these days. And years and years ago when I was at Disney World, we went into one of the nicer restaurants because it was where you could watch the fireworks. And I mentioned to the waiter, I said, is it possible to get this one thing without the bread because I'm allergic to wheat? Next thing I know, the executive chef came out, talked to me about all of my food allergies, and then custom built a dish based on the ingredients that they had. Right.
Yep.
Well, it is Disney World and best practice customer obsession.
Yep.
But if you take that approach of customer obsession and you say, how can I create something that's interesting that you'll enjoy and that 40 Pink Dragons will enjoy and that I'll enjoy and, Max will enjoy, you find these overlapping cohorts that it makes it a lot easier to find something that works for everybody.
I agree it's possible. I'm playing devil's advocate here because it does, it can feel like, oh my God, anything I do excludes somebody. Yeah. And am I going to get tagged? Your example of that, one guy sends an email, he doesn't include everyone. Somebody else chimes in and says, sure, I'll chip in. And it becomes interpreted as a private dinner with the director.
Yeah.
It feels like a trap. If you're sitting on the other side of that, it feels like, oh my God, I just tried to buy pizza, and so I want to riff a little bit, and then Danny, you can certainly jump in on it.
Go for it.
The riff here, folks, that I wanted to say is, look, speaking as a white man, I get the feeling of, oh my God, I'm a villain all the time. I'm not sensitive enough to black needs. I'm not sensitive enough to Hispanic needs. I'm not sensitive enough to female needs. I'm not sensitive enough to people who are cisgendered or have different gender identities, and I can't take it. And and luckily I'm retired. I have no paid staff now. But when I was in this role, you feel like, oh my God, I'm a villain to everybody. I can't solve all the world's problems, and I don't hate any of these people. I'm not holding any of them down. Why am I the bad guy? And I get that feeling. I understand it. And the key is I want to share is it's an emotional feeling. It's an emotion, and it comes out first. I want to talk about why I perceive, and Danny can add to this, why I perceive that I end up feeling this way. And I think a lot of you do because I hear it from others. And then what you can do about it. So why I perceive it is, I don't know how many of you remember, but a year or so ago, it might have been 2 years ago, there was this 2 hashtags that came out on Twitter. And one of them was a woman basically was talking, Danny will know the details, I'm sure, but she was talking about assault, and it became not all men. Some guy responded to it, said, not all men assault women. And the woman or a set of women and others responded and said, yes, but all women have to fear that some guy will. And so the same thing applies here, which is I may not be a bigot, but there are bigots. And I may not be a misogynist or someone who believes that women don't make good executives or don't make good engineers, but those people exist. And the folks in our communities, they have suffered at the hands of them, and they don't know how much of a bigot I am or not. Mm-hmm. Because in the modern world, very few bigots hold up their hands and say, well, I'm a vice president now, and I just like to announce that actually I'm a bigot, and you're going to have to deal with it. But I'm going to be careful. I won't violate any laws. I'll just screw you every way I can. But I'll never, nobody's going to say.
It's like when we talked about, as long as you're an equal opportunity jerk, you can be a jerk.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, the reason people are afraid and they give us static is that actions are ambiguous. And that same, you can look at that director who chipped in and said, I'll get pizza with you. You can look at that and say, you can look at it through two lenses. Through one lens, it was a dude innocently replying to an email with not having any idea who was on it or not. And you can look at it the other way and say, wow, he just literally constructed a private party that left me out. And if you're the person who already feels left out, it's very easy to see it as that was intentional. Mm-hmm. And intention is very hard to know because maybe it was completely innocent. It's late at night. People want pizza. I say, sure. Maybe he took a look and said, oh, and that nagging woman isn't on this. No one will ever know what went through his mind. I happen to know the guy and have a guess, but that's not the point. Yeah. No one will ever know or be able to prove what did he actually think. Did he notice and decide, oh, good, thank God, not her? Or did he think, gee, I'd like pepperoni? Like, could have been thinking either one. So that's why people are really sensitive about it, because they can't really tell. Yeah. Now, where's the good news in this? And I realize I'm taking up a lot of air, and I'm going to give Danny plenty of air on this. She can go on as long as she wants. The good news on this is we can choose to be the hero. We can choose to say, you know what? I can feel beaten down and I can cloak myself. And by the way, it's true. As a leader, I can take the attitude and say, this is not my problem. As long as I'm not breaking the law, as long as I'm not actively oppressing people, I don't have to put any effort into extra diversity. I don't have to put any effort into finding more minorities or helping them rise. I don't have to coach. I don't have to do any of that. And I'm not, basically, at least right now in society, as long as you're not doing actively negative things and you hand wave a little bit at diversity, you'll get away with that. But you can choose to be the hero. And the real call to action here tonight is the reverse, which is, if you don't want to be the villain, start doing something active to be the hero. Because passive, you may not be a villain. You may legitimately not be a bad person. Probably you're not. I believe you're not. But if you're not fighting the good fight, you're also not picking up your cape and being a hero. And so my message would be, get your cape out of the box, put it on, and start doing something. And Danny, I'll turn it over to you. I know I went on at length, but I wanted to work my way around to, let's get our capes out of the box and go be the heroes.
So I think one of the things to first realize, Ethan, is to your point, doing this when it's not a habit is hard work.
Yep.
Because you're changing behavior, right? You start with, I'm pretty sure you've heard my story about how you start with the neuroscience and you're actually creating synapses in the brain when you create a behavior. And it takes repeated activity to actually build that behavior into a habit where it goes from your conscious mind to your unconscious mind. And that's where it stops becoming work. And so if I can get you, or if you're willing to step up and Pick a habit that is a positive habit, that cape habit, and do that every day, every couple of days, and you repeat it till it becomes a natural behavior. It's no longer hard work. It's now how you do it. I mean, I remember having a conversation with you at one point because you were really frustrated. It's like, do I have to go write the job description and then give it to you and you give me all these edits and then I have to go make the edits? And I said, well, you could do that or you could just write it inclusively from the beginning. Your choice. The challenge is are you willing to put in the work to develop one inclusive habit that you then integrate into your life in a way? And then you'll start finding that because you've done one, you do a second, you do a third. It's kind of like eating potato chips or popcorn. It just keeps happening. So the challenge for everybody on the stream is, are you willing to take on one habit today that you start doing and measure how you're making a difference to someone else? And this could be as easy as studies show, I can start rattling off all the statistics, right? Studies show that in a meeting, women who talk 30% of the time are viewed by men as talking too much. Because we talk so little in meetings, it's popping into everybody's conscious awareness, and that's why they think it's too much. One thing you can do as a hero, you can reward and encourage that woman to speak up. Say, I really like that point. Tell me more. If you see somebody stomping on top of that woman, to shut her down, saying, no, we don't do that here. We listen to somebody, let her finish speaking, and then let's debate it, right? Yeah. Those are two really simple things. Yes, they take practice to execute. Yes, they take confidence at stepping up in front of a whole bunch of your peers and suddenly saying, in a very subtle way, y'all are jerks, let her talk. But those are a couple fairly straightforward things that are low friction to adopt that will make a huge change.
And I love that. I was actually going to ask you, can you give us an example of something simple to do? And saying, I'd like to hear the rest of what Danny was saying is really easy and can be very, like, it doesn't have to be fake. I'd like to hear the rest of what she was saying. I'd like to, or can we let her finish? Yep. And it's easy. That's one of the points this is the fun part. It's hard to learn the habit, but it doesn't have to be super hard to do the work. This stuff goes by really easily. It can slip. In my final days at Amazon, I was teaching a class, and a guy asked me a question, and his question, I'm sure, was innocent. But he wanted to ask me about someone who had taken action that wasn't approved, had gone rogue. And he said, well, so-and-so went off the reservation. Mm-hmm. And I didn't catch it fast enough to comment on it because I noticed him like, oh, that's not good. And for anybody who doesn't know, off the reservation is a reference in the past to Native Americans who were placed in a reservation system. And the reference going off the reservation meant this person basically escaped their little Native American prison we put them on. Because back in the day, we put people on a reservation. We expected them to stay there because we didn't like tribes roaming around the West. So the saying off the reservation is insulting, but it became a part of our vernacular. And I don't think this guy had the slightest thought about Native Americans one way or the other when he said that, but I missed the chance to call it out. And it has to do with this being prepared. Because it would have been easy to say, happy to answer your question. By the way, I don't think you meant to use the phrase off the reservation, but we shouldn't use that, or we don't use that.
I can't tell you how many people in sales back when I was doing sales engineering would say open kimono conversation. Same thing. It's language matters. Language has impact. Yep. And using, whether it's as simple as, and I I'm the first one to say that I struggle with this. I grew up with five older brothers, so not using "hey guys" is super, super hard. I fail all the time at it, right?
Yep.
Um, but those are things where recognizing not everybody in the room may be a guy. Not everybody in the room um, may appreciate a reference that talks about getting naked in front of all of your peers as a way of truthful, honest, authentic conversation. Um,
Yeah, I actually, it's very true. If you picture it literally, any of the sales meetings I've ever been in, I do not
yep.
want my counterparts opening their kimonos. If you want a good laugh chat, if you've ever been in a large meeting of any type or any sort of like you've bought a car, you've signed for an apartment, anything that just imagine if the other side had shown up in kimonos and said, "We're going to tell you it's our best price. And first, we're going to go like this and give you the full Monty, as it's called." That's horrifying.
Yes.
That's terrible.
Yes.
Uh, but it's fun to think about. Yeah, I do not want open kimono as a yeah, woo,
As a tagline.
as a
Yeah.
tagline.
The other things to think about are also how do you respond when somebody else is talking to you? And I'll give another example. Woman in our organization was trying to fit in with the team. This was a different team than the other one. Fairly junior in her career, was on a mostly guy team, and the guys were regularly inviting each other out to lunch all the time, and she never got invited out to lunch. So she said, "Hey, I'm going to step up and I'm going to invite Joe, whatever his name was, out to lunch." He automatically took it as she was interested in him and trying to have a date,
Mm.
which led to months of problems on that team. Would you
Yeah,
expect someone, if you are cis and hetero, are you going to expect that somebody of your same sex asking you out for lunch is a pickup line? And if it's not, then you shouldn't expect that of any other gender.
that's right. And this is again made so much more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So a story I don't know if I've ever shared with you, Danny. Um, many many years ago, I was working at Amazon. I got divorced, and my HR business partner started hitting on me. So, uh, and she did it overtly enough that my peer director at the time caught on to it.
Oh, geez.
He's like, "So and so doesn't come to my office twice a week." Wink. Like, um,
Yeah.
so the point is, what's the actual point there? Um, the point is what makes it so hard at work is lunch can be both lunch and lunch.
Exactly.
And
Right. And how do you tell the difference? And we get into the whole conversation about consent and what does consent matter? And what are you consenting to in a business situation may be completely different to what you consent to in a non-business situation. And what happens when the group of you at work uh, have a big hefty meeting with senior leaders of the company, and you go out to a restaurant after work, after dinner, and the boss picks up the tab, and then you go from there to a bar. Is it still work? And do the same rules apply?
yep,
And what happens if they don't? All of those can make it. All of those can make it a minefield to where, if you and I, and I didn't know you were married, blah blah blah. We were off at a bar because it was part of something, and you and I are having a friendly conversation. How do I know? How do I interpret what your friendship is? Going back to your comment, going back to your comment earlier about women always have to assume that the guy has evil intentions, right? Um,
or at least
So,
may have them. Yeah,
or may have, right? So
may.
I
It's an
have to assume
unknown.
worst intent
Yep,
in
have
order
to
to protect
assume.
myself.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess another thing for everybody who's watching, and thank you all for listening in on this conversation, because I feel it's important that we get better at this as a society. I suck at it. There's a lot to learn. I mean, it's a huge developing difficulty. It's very, very hard, and you will make mistakes. With the best
Yeah.
intentions, you will make mistakes. You know, I will still, I haven't said this phrase in a long time, and I never, when it was first pointed out to me that it was racist, I didn't, like, this is a long time ago now, and some of you would be like, really? But I was, one of the ways that you would say something, that someone did something nice or generous, that you'd say, well, that's mighty white of you. And, you know, like
Uh-huh.
these kinds of things, it's the type thing you say in an instant. Oh, that's mighty white of you. Like, that was really nice of you. But of course, what's the implication? Like, white equals nice, and not white equals, you know, a non-white person wouldn't have done that.
Yep.
And it's built into the language, and you have to figure out how to unprogram all that.
And
So,
as long as things are, as long as the default is cis white male, hetero white male, everything is judged against that artificial norm. And anything that's different is usually inherently bad.
right.
That's, that's how the human brain works, right? Us against them, protect the family versus, the caveman stuff, right? So you take that first, your first unconscious thought is it's not the norm, therefore I have to worry about it.
So I want to, if you're okay, migrate to
Yeah,
another topic. And
totally.
that topic is merit. The other thing I think makes this topic so sensitive is as soon as we start talking about diversity, what plays in the mind of a lot of people, and and particularly of people who get upset or angry about it, is okay, diversity. What you're doing is you're putting in all this effort to find and recruit more women, find and recruit more minorities, ideally hook them up with great mentors, make sure they're getting lots of attention for promotion. They're getting all their how many there are. Like at Amazon, we track what's called underrepresented minorities. They have their own
Mm-hmm.
acronym, URM, and we track URM attrition. And if a URM, an underrepresented minority, leaves, the question is why and what could we have done? And I'm sitting over here, being an innocent white guy, feeling like, okay, what you're really telling me between the lines is we want to increase diversity, particularly at leadership levels. That's code word for we're going to promote everyone that but you. If we can find a woman or a minority who we can squint and say they can do that job, we're going to give it to them because we want to increase diversity. So I support diversity in theory, but now you're like hitting my paycheck. You're actually
Yep.
telling me we're going to try to put other people up in front of you. That's threatening. And it makes me angry, right? Like if I have bills to pay, I have student loans to pay. Again, I'm putting
Yep.
myself
Yeah. Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
I don't have student loans. But if I'm in that situation, I've heard from some of these guys, or they might be women who are white, or they might be men, right? And anybody who has considered more privilege and less diversity versus those who have less privilege and more diversity. It's really hard for me to get on board with I should accept a demotion, which is the lack of a promotion for this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I'm all about why isn't it okay to say we do this on merit? Whoever's best for the job. And I know, Danny, I'm purposely, by the way, serving
Yep.
Danny a
Yep.
softball. But
Yes, you are.
why isn't merit the right way? Whoever is the best man, woman of any race, why don't we hire and promote on that?
So I'm going to go back to what I was just saying before about if the default is cishet white male, I automatically don't make that standard. So I have no way of competing in a situation where the default or the expected above the bar um, is cishet white male. I can never meet that bar, so I'm already at a disadvantage. That's one piece of it. Second piece of it is historically, and this still has some impact. Some of the links that I sent you that I'm hoping that we'll put into uh,
Yeah, I can put them in
up on YouTube or
Discord,
whatnot.
and
Yeah,
we can
in
find them and
Discord.
put them in.
Um, there's some really good data around several things. I'm going to list them off, but systemic barriers that keep women, Blacks, Latinx, Native Americans, other underrepresented minorities from having an equal shot at those roles. So what we're trying to do is level the playing field so that everybody has the same access to those opportunities that we didn't have before. Um, and so that's a piece of it. But one of the other things is if you go into an interview and, for example, or you're going into a promotional review and you've got that default is cishet white male, anything that this candidate does that deviates from that perceived norm is seen typically as a defect. So if one of the things we know, going back to the Amazon example, Amazon is well known for having a direct communication style. You lead with data, you start with the data, and then you give context. It's a certain communication style. If instead I'm a narrative communication style individual, which means I start by storytelling and kind of spiral into the data and spiral into the answer, that is seen as a defect in many cases at Amazon. So the fact that I have a different communication style, which really is no better or no worse than anyone else's as long as I'm effectively communicating my message, the fact that my message is delivered differently holds me back from a promotion, holds me back from opportunities. Um, so there's a whole, and I'm sorry, I lost part of my train of thought, Ethan. So
Yep.
there's um, a number of intertwined things that are happening here where what we're trying to do is moving forward, make sure that everyone in the organization has equal access. So some of the things that I do, for example, is we compare promotion rates of men and women, minorities and non-minorities. Are they promoting in about the same time frame from level to level? Are they getting the similar access to opportunity? I think you remember where I did the mashup of data, and we discovered that women and the Blacks and Latinx in that particular team actually had the exact same access to the cutting edge technology and the cutting edge features we were building, as well as they weren't getting stuck with the hygiene. They weren't getting stuck with the bug fixes.
Yep.
They weren't getting stuck with the things that weren't career enhancing opportunities. As long as those are being fairly shared around, um, what again you're feeling in that, if you feel like you are being persecuted, I would take a step back and say, is it because I'm just getting less access because things are being shared, or am I being actively discriminated against? And what I suspect you'll find is that what's happening is there's 10 features being done in this next release. If there are 5 developers, each one should get 2, which means you're going to get one fun one and one not fun one. Whereas before you might have gotten 2 fun ones and the woman on the team got 2 hygiene tasks. And what we're trying to do is share it more so that everybody has access.
Yeah, and I strongly agree with that. Going straight back to the why is merit not good enough?
Oh, I now that reminded me, that was the other
Yeah.
thing I was going to chime in on it. So thank you. Merit assumes a specific set of skill sets. Right. If you make that argument, why aren't we just doing it on merit? Why aren't we just doing it on how clean a code you write, for example?
Yeah,
Right.
technical ability.
Right.
It's technical
What you're
role,
not
technical
taking into
ability.
account is someone's ability to problem solve, somebody's ability to get to the right answer in a reasonable frame of time, somebody's lived experiences that might give them a different perspective. So I'm going to use the story of a company I used to work for, that they were building a brand new console and they were building a brand new controller to go with the console. And they were showing it off internally before they announced it. And somebody came up to the head of the organization and said, you know, that controller will not work in Asia. The controller was huge. And you know, people who have small hands are not going to be able to use this controller. It's going to be uncomfortable. And when he went back to the design team that designed it were all middle-aged white guys with large hands. So I actually can't use that old controller. A lot of people can't. So what they ended up doing was running focus groups in Asia to find out that, in fact, this controller was uncomfortable for anybody to use for any length of time, and they had to redesign a smaller controller. What they found was women with small hands, men with small hands, kids all could use that new controller, and they actually expanded their market.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go on just pure merit, you're going to end up driving to groupthink rather than getting these different perspectives that are going to challenge your thinking and say, hey, I can't use that thing. Can we change it? Can we tweak it so that I can use it too?
Yep. And I have a little bit more to say on this that has to do with the hero cape. I want to challenge others as well. Look, the basic argument on merit is pretty simple. I had the opportunity to go to a really good college and a really good graduate school, and probably a lot of that came from the fact that my parents were well enough to pay for me to go to that school. And where'd their money come from? Well, we never owned slaves, but we've always been white, and you know, those advantages accumulated. So the point is, you may not be a racist, I may not be a racist, but the fact is, right now the tables are lopsided, and there are plenty of examples of minorities being held back, women being held back. And here's the real truth, in my opinion. We have to step up and lend a hand, and that may mean getting a little bit less for ourselves. And that's hard to take when you're trying to figure out how to pay your rent and pay your student loans, saying, well, I'm also going to be generous and give a hand up to somebody who has less. It's hard to do when you feel under stress yourself, which is normally why I run this channel. I say on this channel all the time that I'm trying to help all of you be successful enough in your careers that you can feel economically secure so that you can be generous to others on other topics, whether that's leading on the environment or leading on social causes or leading on problems you see in the world or leading on this topic. Part of the truth is we may have to take a little bit of an opportunity to hold out a hand and say, you know what? I get that occasionally someone may go in front of me, and that's really hard to accept, that one of the criteria that we're going to bake into jobs in the future, that's going to get baked into jobs, is diversity of perspective. And look, if I want to, trust me, if I sit down, and if Danny and I don't work at Amazon anymore, but if I circle up with the lawyers and we have a secret little room where I say, tell me how to write my criteria so I can choose to promote women, the lawyers will tell me don't do that. But the bottom line is we can figure out a way to write criteria into a job that favor women or favor minorities. And nobody actually does that as far as I know. But the point is I can find ways to do it. And I think a better solution is for those of us who generally have good fortune and have a lot of advantages rolling our way to try and help out more proactively so it doesn't get to that. I'm not a fan of quotas and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not recommending any of that. But what I am saying is we can choose to do more. We can either choose to be grumpy and feel like, oh, it's not a meritocracy, you're threatening me. Or we can move past our fear and say, you know what, I'm going to do fine in my life. I'm a hard worker. There's tons of demand for my skills. The fact is, there's all these inherent biases for deep voiced, loud, tall, white males that I'm going to do just great anyway. I can afford to give some ground and try and put forward my female and minority colleagues because they're usually screwed. And some people, by the way, are screwing them actively, are trying to hold them back or hold them down. They don't admit it all the time anymore. They're usually smart enough not to say it. Yep. But they're either consciously or unconsciously acting out on their biases. And I think we can put on the hero's cape again and do better.
Yeah. So I'm going to interrupt with a question for you, Ethan. If you were up for promotion and you lost out to another guy, would your first response be they're not qualified?
No.
Then why is it if a woman gets promoted?
Well, first, it may not be.
Yeah.
Depends on how well I know that woman and
yeah.
But you, because diversity is such a topic, and because I know that there's pressure to increase diversity at leadership levels, if I can't see where she's clearly more qualified on some sort of objective criteria, it's easy to suspect. It's easy to suspect, oh, they put her up because she's a woman. And, if you look, Amazon added a woman to the board of directors recently. Amazon added one or more women to the what's called the S team, the team of senior vice presidents. There's about 20 of them that lead the company. And it's easy if you don't know them to say, well, maybe, and one of them happens to have less tenure. One of the women who got put on this S team, by the way, after I left, after I had retired, there was a woman added to the senior team at Amazon. And I only know her by reputation, and she's been at the company not as long as most people on that team. So it's really easy to say, oh, see, she doesn't fit the pattern. It's usually been people that have been with the company a long time, and suddenly she's been promoted. Did she really earn it? And it's really easy to think that way because you don't, if you have all the data, you might say, oh, she's actually amazing. But if you don't, it's really easy to be suspicious because you know that there's pressure to add diversity.
That, and I think it going back to kind of, your own self-interest. If you are looking, if you were looking to promote and you don't get promoted, you don't ever want to think about, why am I not good enough?
No,
right?
It hurts.
That's the harder self-reflection,
totally.
Right? It's much easier to say somebody else isn't. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Completely.
Or as I like to say, I've been married twice and divorced twice, and there's a common data point across that.
Yeah, me. Right. Absolutely.
Right?
There's only one common data point.
That's right. And so you can you have to start getting self-reflective in that point, right? And so where everybody can do this, and I'll be honest, I have run into this too, because now it's not, when I started getting involved in the diversity movement inside of Amazon, when I was one of the founders of Inclusive at 7.5 years ago, it was mostly about getting white women into business and getting white women promoted. Very specific, and it wasn't intentional, it wasn't obvious, but that's actually, in hindsight, that's actually what was going on. And now that it is broadened to include our trans men and women, our military men and women, our Black women, our Black men, et cetera, I'm feeling crowded out as well. And that's something I have to deal with and acknowledge that I have a little bit of, but didn't I deserve? And to your point, it's like, for all the things that have happened in my life, I am now really well off. I have a very comfortable job. I have a great boss. I have, the dream career that I never thought I was going to have. I never would have picked this career, let's put it that way, but it's been an amazing ride. Isn't that enough? And shouldn't I share with others? And
Yeah.
that paying forward is becoming important to me.
Yeah. So what I would say to everyone listening is the fallacy in promotion is that it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
The fallacy is that a woman who gets a job means a guy didn't, or more specifically, you didn't. That a woman or a black man who gets a raise means you didn't get a raise and you can't.
Yeah.
And there are places, I want to be super clear, there are places where that is true temporarily. So if there is one seat to go to a conference, or there is one seat to work on a hot project, and it goes to a Hispanic person of Hispanic descent, and not you, then you did lose out. Like, it was zero sum. It was either you or them.
Right.
But across the arc of life and business, if you're working hard, I always tell people this, at Amazon and other companies, leaders are desperate for more talent. They're desperate for help.
Yep.
And in the end, we have seats for everybody. And so I completely get, and I have fumed, I'm not going to be a hypocrite here, I have fumed inside my heart when I've seen other people get seats I wanted, whether they were men or women.
Yep.
But I have to make my own seat. And there are so many seats. It's whether or not you believe that life is a zero-sum game, whether it's called a plenty mentality versus a scarcity mentality. And if you have the view that that opportunity is scarce, this will all be very threatening to you. And I think that's what causes a lot of the racism in our society, is some people feel like good jobs and good education and good houses are scarce, and they need to be tribal and fight to keep them. And others feel like, we can build more houses and our economy is growing and there's going to be enough room for everyone. And if you can take that latter view, it will be less threatening and you're more in a place to help others. So I know this stuff can be hard to swallow, by the way, if you're in the situation where you're worried about your student loans. So I'm just trying to give you a roadmap. So, Danny, we've been talking a while. We're not going to have a time to get to everything. Do you want me to tell the what kind of white are you story, or do you want to go somewhere else? What would you like to cover?
Well, what I'd like to touch on with the what kind of white are you is, I think this plays into, and so I would like you to give a short
I can do it quickly.
Version of it, and have everybody be thinking about it while you're talking about it. How would they answer the question?
Well, my audience is diverse, but it is a good question. If you're in the audience and you're white, I will bet you've never been asked the question, what kind of white are you? So let me give the whole background. You can just think about that. If someone said, hey, what kind of white are you? How would you answer that? So the backstory is, real quick, a couple of years ago when I started working on learning more about this topic with Danny and others, my daughter is adopted from China. And I went and asked her, I said, hey, how often at school does it come up, your Chinese heritage? And she stunned me, and I felt like a heel for not having asked much earlier. And she said, oh, every day, every week, certainly every week, often every day. And I was like, oh my God, really? So bad dad, score one for not knowing. But, she got the question because her name is Thai, but she's Chinese. And so people would think she was Thai. And so they would ask, and a common question I understand many people from Asia get is, well, what kind of Asian are you? Are you Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese? What are you? And I just thought, she's getting this question once a week. And so I'm 50 years old. If I had gotten it once a week, I'd have heard the question 2,500 times in my life. In fact, though, I've never heard the question. No one has ever come to me and said, hey, Ethan, what kind of white are you? But it's equally valid. And I have been asked by friends or in other circumstances, hey, but they don't ask, what kind of white are you? Instead, they ask, where are you descended from? You know, what part of Europe, or, you know, where are your ancestors from? They ask it very differently. And I also don't fear that if I say, oh, my grandfather was German, which is true, or Evans is a Welsh name, which is also true, that they're going to be like, oh, Welsh. Does that mean you're good with a longbow? German. You must like beer. Like, no one's going to make that assumption. But for the folks who are Asian, if they say, oh yeah, I'm Korean, or my parents were Korean, plenty of people will say, you must love kimchi. Well, I don't know. I grew up here. Like, actually, you don't know. Yeah. And like for my daughter, because she was adopted when she was 7 months old, she doesn't speak Chinese, you know, but that's an assumption people make. So I've told the story now, and the thing I'd like everyone who happens to be white in the audience to realize, think about if you were being asked once a week, what type of white are you? And then let's say you were German, you're of German descent. Would it bother you if you knew when people were asking that some of them, after they heard it, were going, oh, Nazi?
Yeah.
Right? We're making an assumption like, he probably is down with Hitler. Yeah. And fill in the blank, by the way, for any stereotype of any European culture. Oh, Irish, probably drinks a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, I would hate it if people were all once a week were asking me that and then assuming shit about me. But that's the norm for others. Where did you want to go from there, Danny?
Where to go from there is things like, it's not just that, it then builds on that with the, I don't believe you. So somebody who used to be a manager of mine at Amazon, he was born in Indianapolis. His parents happened to be born in a different country. He regularly gets asked, you know, where are you from? And he says, I'm an Indiana boy. I'm from Indiana. No, where are you really from? Right? There's the, I don't trust what you're saying because you look different than me. So therefore you're either lying or you're trying to obscure the truth. And he's like, no, I'm an Indiana boy. And he likes country music and the whole nine yards. Right. And for somebody who happens to be a 6 foot tall Indian man, it's vastly funny listening to him sing country songs. But the point being is that the dominant population, tends to not take people at their word when they don't look like us or they don't sound like us. There are folks who, they grew up in an immigrant household. Somebody I used to work with at Microsoft, his parents were Cuban. He had grown up in Florida, but he still grew up with Cuban Spanish as his primary language and had an accent.
Yep.
And so people would ask him, where are you from? And he would say Miami. And it's like, no, you can't be from Miami. Similar kind of thing.
Yep.
So the net result of all of this, I think, is be kind, don't make assumptions, and find ways to positively help somebody have a better day. And if you take those couple of things away as action items, we've all won.
Yeah. Thank you again, Danny, for giving simple stuff people can do where you don't have to fix this whole problem yourself. If we all just do a little bit more, the world changes over time. Yeah. I will say, I've mentioned my daughter Ty was adopted from China. When we first brought her home, we got some very well-meaning but harmful questions. One thing people ask when you have an adopted kid, because obviously my daughter doesn't look like me, they say things where they're just not, you said words matter. Some people get
Mm-hmm.
really offended at this. I just kind of laugh. But I have been asked, do you have any real children? No, only fake ones.
Ooh. Ooh.
Do you have any real children? Equally, I have been asked, do you have any children of your own?
Yeah.
Nope, only stolen ones. Only fake stolen ones. That's all
I
I have.
love it.
Do you have? And then definitely a long time ago, my daughter amazingly will turn 18 in just a few days and be a
Oh
grown
my
woman.
God.
Yep,
You're old.
Yes, I am. But China used to have the one-child policy, and under the one-child policy, the reason our daughter was available for adoption is they would give up little girls in pursuit. Some families would give up little girls in pursuit of a male heir.
Yep.
And when we adopted and brought her here, we had an older generation Chinese man ask us, how much did they pay you to take her?
Yep.
Because he couldn't imagine that anyone would purposefully adopt a female child. And so how much, and it's interesting. I see some folks here talking in chat. I also have a very good friend. They're talking about different behaviors in India. I had a very good friend from India who started asking me questions about why we had adopted from China. He came at me a little bit hard, and he was like, so why did you adopt from China? How did you pick China? And I explained that we had had friends adopt from China, and so we knew about adoption from China. But what I ended up sussing out, and those of you in chat who've been saying there's a pecking order amongst Asian cultures will love this. He was Indian, and he was telling me, well, there are orphans in India as well. He was trying to figure out if, because I was American and I could adopt from anywhere in the world, if my adoption of a Chinese girl was subtly saying Chinese are better, smarter, prettier, faster, whatever, than Indians. Which it took me a while to figure out that that's what he was trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
But he was legitimately suspicious that by adopting a girl from China, I was saying, I've baked them all off. And when I went to the baby Kmart, I definitely bought the Chinese model. It's better than the Indian one.
You went down the Chinese aisle at Kmart. Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah.
So
the hell I got
all these
into having
stories-
a black boyfriend at one point when I was young. Oh, my God.
Oh, wow.
Like the world had come down.
Yeah. My grandfather got remarried, and he famously said to my, I guess, step aunt or whatever, my half aunt, they're nice people, but we don't date them.
Yes.
They're nice people, but we don't date them.
Yeah. Or I can't be racist. I have a black friend.
Yeah. So why are we sharing these stories? Why am I sharing these stories? It's important to know that, some people have ingrained suspicions, like my friend who was wondering if I was judging Indians by having adopted from China. And B, the people who asked me if I had any real children, if I had any children of my own, they legitimately just wanted to know, did I also have biological children? But even that word's loaded. Nope, she's not biological. She's plastic. They wanted to know, though, do I have any children descended? It's almost hard to find words for it, right? That are genetically
do you
related.
have a legitimate heir?
Oh,
right? Because
that's another
adopted, yeah, because,
Oh.
adopted is kind of like having bastard children. They're not really real.
It's and just to show you, by the way, there may be some folks in chat here, I think there might be, who speak Chinese. I was told that if you decompose the characters in China for daughter-in-law, that daughter-in-law is composed of the characters that can mean female and obedient. And so, but it's actually, I'd be curious if there's anyone who speaks Chinese that can put that in there, that can let me know if that's true or not, because I've heard that. Um, but in the meantime, yeah. Um,
It's yeah, and so it comes down to, it comes down to we're hardwired to protect our own and to be defensive and questioning of anyone who doesn't look like us by whatever that look like comprises. And the more we can learn about others, learn cultural things, um, become comfortable. You start in, I like to use the example, instead of saying us against them and having it do two people fighting against each other, I like to think of it as concentric circles. And the bigger you can grow your us, the smaller you shrink the gap between us and them. And the more you learn about other cultures, the more you get to know that people are people are people. And we all want the same things, right? We want food, shelter, someone to love us, um, work that is meaningful, and some kind of sense of security. That's the common ground we can all build on. And whether that's at work or in personal life, whatever, the if you remember those and assume best intent, it covers a lot of gaffes and accidental, oh, I didn't mean to say that, or I didn't intend it that way, or a lot of the other accidentals that happen in daily life.
okay. So Danny, there's a bunch
Yeah,
of questions. You know our
yeah.
Q&A tool well. There's a bunch of questions that have been put in there. We can invite people to vote again. How would you feel about wrapping up by addressing a few of those questions?
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first question is a good one. We didn't really touch on these, but the question is, are quotas more of a problem than a solution? How to write a tech. Well, this will be interesting. We'll take the next question, which is, how do you create a job description for a technical role that's inclusive? Genuinely just curious, as tech is a pretty black and white field.
Oh, the first thing you do is you make it evocative. So studies show that women are 60% more likely to be purpose driven than men, meaning I will learn enough about coding to go build an app. Men are typically more willing to learn coding and then figure out how to apply it. So the way you make it inclusive is you write your job description so that it is evocative about what they will get to own, what they will get to drive, and what they're delivering. And that becomes interesting to everybody. Um, you think about ways to make it exciting. I recently had to post a job description because I was hiring somebody for my team, and on an internal post, because we now have these internal forums where you can send send out basically a small advert saying, "Hey, I'm interested in hiring," and you send it off to the folks who are interested in looking for roles. And I started out by saying, "I have by far the best job in the company. Do you want to come work with me?" And that got a crap ton of applicants from all spectrums across the company. People who, I was asking for somebody who was a senior program manager, and I got people who were working in the fulfillment centers all the way up because I made it sound interesting.
Yep.
That's how you write the job description.
So I want to ask something about this that stuck out to me, and I wondered about it. This question said, genuinely just curious, as tech is pretty black and white. Should we worry about the fact that tech is pretty black and white as phrasing or not?
Mm-hmm. We should.
Okay.
Yep.
Um,
Because black is implied bad, white is implied good, at least in social context. This individual may not, and I didn't
no,
see it, but
I
that
don't think anybody
individual may
meant
not meant
anything.
it that way, right?
Right.
But there's exclusionary language. Do you still refer to your server setup as master and slave? Do you still refer to, Amazon until recently, we had white days and black days during peak time. When could you deploy code?
Yep.
We're now going to blocked and unblocked. Things like that, where you just take away the subtle connotation that goes back to the uh, discrimination of a specific subset of folks. What's a good alternative to black and white?
Clear cut.
Something would be um, cut and dried,
Yeah, cut and
or
dried or
something
clear
that
cut.
is, yeah, clear cut. Yeah.
Tech is pretty cut and dried. Tech is pretty specific. Tech is pretty. There are other words. Now, I don't think. I've never actually heard something being called black and white being taken because it is just it can be interpreted racially. It can also just be interpreted as opposites, right? Those colors are opposites of
Right.
each other. But
But
it could
the
be.
the symbolism goes back to um, Christianity, and light is goodness and dark is evil. It actually goes back to, throughout a number of languages, back to whether it's Christianity or some of the Norse religions, this idea that light is good and dark is bad. Because if you think about it, abstracting it to a non-religious background, if you're, caveman family, you're in a cave or you're in a house and it's night, what comes out at night? you know Cougars, coyotes, all sorts of dangerous things are out hunting at night. And that's where the association originally came from, was that kind of association. And it's carried forward into our language that unintentionally causes harm when somebody who is dark skinned is inferred as being evil or not good or not lightness and goodness because they're not looking like me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the next question, the last one we'll take, and then we'll do Lilo and Stitch because we'll be at
Yeah.
2 hours at that point. Danny, wondering if anyone has come up to you after a diversity training or an incident and said they always feel like they are walking on eggshells and don't know how to deal with certain situations anymore. How do you coach them? So that's a pretty elaborate question. I'm not sure exactly what it means.
Oh,
But
I do.
anyway, if you have something to say about that, people walking on eggshells and they don't know how to deal with certain situations anymore.
Yeah. So if you are nervous about saying the wrong thing or you're nervous about harming, the easiest thing to do, and I'm going to say easy, it is emotionally hard to be vulnerable. But the right thing to do is to take that individual aside, or ask when it's appropriate, what is the right way to address you? What pronouns do you prefer? Is it okay to ask this question? Are you open to this kind of conversation? You present this learn and be curious approach with transparent honesty, saying, I'm trying to learn. I would like to know a little bit more about what it's like to be non binary. Would you help me understand why the use of these set of pronouns is important to you? And you frame the conversation up that way, and you build trust with the other person. So, real quick lesson on how you build trust with someone in 15 minutes. You have to be vulnerable first. You have to express vulnerability to the other person, have them recognize that you are being vulnerable and authentic to them. And if they trust that authenticity, they will respond with a little bit of vulnerability. And if you in turn reward them for that vulnerability, you can kind of ratchet up this ability to be vulnerable very quickly. There's a couple of really good videos on YouTube from Brene Brown that covers this. And so I would advocate for people to go look at those and go watch them. But the simple answer is ask somebody out for coffee, or a virtual coffee if you're still in COVID land, and say, I'd like to learn more. Are you comfortable answering these questions? And if you're not, do you know somebody I can reach out to? That's probably the best way to start.
So this brings me to where I'd like to close, and then we'll do the Lilo and Stitch piece. I want to talk to people. This is a career channel, and Danny, you can feel free to add to this, but I want to talk to you about how I see this being good for your career. So we've talked about how this is good for humanity. It's the right thing to do. None of us wants to be the villain. From a pure career viewpoint, the more allies and supporters you have around you, whether you're a leader or not a leader of people at this point, the better you will do. work is a cooperative effort. And the more you bring people together around you and make them feel supported, they will run through walls for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, an example I'll give real quick is in my final days at Amazon, the Black Lives Matter events happened, and I took some public stances on that.
Mm-hmm.
And black members of my team reached out to me and said, "Oh my God, it means so much to me you did that. I never thought I'd live to see the day
Yep.
someone taking those actions." Well, I can
Mm-hmm.
infer, and I believe it's true, that those employees felt more motivated and would do better work getting our work done because they felt more comfortable at work. They felt,
Yeah.
as I said, they could bring their whole self. They felt more welcome. I always love it if I want you to have an altruistic motivation. I hope all of you want to do the right thing. But in case you don't, I want to give you some selfish love. Building a strong, diverse team gives you a lot of different opinions and perspectives so that, as Danny said, you can build the controller right to fit different types of hands. If everyone has the same background, you won't address the whole audience. And if you bring that diverse team together and you make them all feel welcome, they will bust their butts for you because I can tell you this. Most of the women, most of the minorities have had bad bosses. They've had predatory bosses that were hitting on them. They've had people they suspected were not racially sensitive or maybe even were outright racist. And when they get to work for somebody who's not, they're like, well, I want to keep this job. I like this person. I'm going to put in extra effort. I've talked before about how leaders and teams depend on discretionary effort or voluntary effort. It's what makes teams thrive, is what people want to do.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you elicit that behavior. So if you wanted me to tie this all back to just pure career success, that's where it comes from. It comes from getting your team to feel like they want to run through a wall for you, and your coworkers want to support you when you're in trouble or not.
Yep.
So that's my perspective of how it helps your career. Danny, anything you want to add there? And then talk about
I
Stitch.
I would just say that I would double down on that. Absolutely. I mean, you know who my manager is. I am very vocal about if I could work for him the rest of my career, I happily would because of that. He's the first one who has really treated me like a human being first, recognizing all my unique attributes and all of that good stuff. But there was never a question that I couldn't do the job.
Right.
And so, yeah, absolutely. You build a great team around you. They will run through a wall for you. They will make you a better person. And so the reason why Lilo and Stitch are behind me, mainly Stitch, is because Stitch is my favorite Disney character. It used to be Tigger. It's now Stitch because it's Ohana, and Ohana means no one is left behind.
Nice.
Yep.
It happens to be my daughter's favorite as well. She's a big. We got
Next time
her.
she's out, we should talk.
Yeah, I got her. Her Christmas present. One of her Christmas presents was Mickey Mouse Stitch ears.
I love it. At PAX 2 years ago, there was an artist who was doing mashups, and actually on the wall right over there, I have Stitch is chewing on a BB-8 chew toy.
That's awesome. So
Yes.
we've gone a long time. We've talked about a lot of stuff. I appreciate everyone being here for this very important conversation. I know that it's not straight up. How do you get promoted? How do you thrive in your work? How do you get a raise? It is that, though, under the covers. It is that one level removed. And I also really want to appreciate Danny for coming and educating me, always helping me on this, because it will be a lifelong journey for me. Some of you were not raised. I was raised in the Midwest. I was raised in the presence of the Ku Klux Klan. There were people who, I was raised in the presence of overt racism. I will fight it all my life. And, those problems are extremely real. I was raised where the fraternities on my local campus thought it was really funny to go to the gay and lesbian clubs meetings and spray them with beer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were, all these things were normal. And it wasn't even, I grew up saying something had a Star of David price without not knowing what a Star of David was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I grew up saying, he tried to Jew me down for someone who was
Yeah.
negotiating. And I didn't know that was a reference. I didn't realize what a Jewish person was until high school. And I didn't
Yeah.
know of any Jewish people in my town because I grew up in a town that it did have Jewish people, but it had only a handful. And I
Yeah.
didn't know. There was no synagogue. I never saw a building, you know, so I had no idea. But all of that was part of my upbringing. And so I'll
Yeah.
be working on this journey my whole life, and I just appreciate the help.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Okay, well, folks, I'm going to do a show next Thursday. It will be more traditionally career-oriented, directly, transparently. I don't know what it's going to be on yet. I may do one on extreme ownership, or in this case, an example of extreme non-ownership. Yeah, Danny's almost always in our chat and always in our Discord. So
Mm-hmm.
if you want to talk more to her, if you want to learn more about what Amazon Games is doing, Danny is very generous with her time. She's very generous, by the way, coaching people, not just that. If I can give a throwback to Douglas Adams, she's also a Hoopy Frood, has played a lot of D&D, works in the game industry,
Yep.
loves Disney. She's loves Star Wars, very, very well connected. Can relate on many, many levels. And I will also say is more authentic than she can be on recorded video. So even she has to edit some of her stories for here. And I've talked to her in private.
Yep.
She's got some edgy stories that she can't always share, but she's lived a real life. So with that, we'll call it a night. And Danny, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Anytime, Ethan.
All right.